Say one sentence in Japanese, the millionaire said with a laugh that echoed across the glass ballroom. If you can, I'll pay you $300,000. If you can't, get out of my sight. Nearly 200 executives fell silent. No one defended the 52-year-old black woman standing alone beside the VIP table. They only stared at Evelyn Carter's faded work jacket, her worn canvas bag, and the way she quietly rested one hand on a tiny silver gear pin clipped to its strap. She didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply looked the millionaire in the eye and said, "Put the bet in writing." The room chuckled, convinced they were watching an ordinary maintenance volunteer embarrass herself in front of powerful investors from Japan. But one Japanese executive wasn't laughing. His eyes never left that small silver pin. For just a heartbeat, his confident expression gave way to recognition, then disbelief. No one else noticed. Not yet. Before this night was over, the same people who stayed silent would rise to their feet. One powerful company would begin to collapse, and the man who thought money could measure human worth would discover that the most dangerous person in the room was the one he never bothered to see. The laughter arrived before the silence. It bounced beneath the soaring glass ceiling of Detroit's Great Lakes Automotive Summit, rolled across polished marble floors, and echoed off displays of gleaming electric vehicles positioned beneath white spotlights. Crystal glasses caught the afternoon light. Silverware chimed softly against porcelain. Conversations about supply chains, robotics, and billion-dollar investments floated through the ballroom like music meant only for people accustomed to success. Then one man's voice cut through all of it. "I think the loading dock is around back." Heads turned. Grant Wallace stood near the center of the ballroom, with the confidence of a man who believed every room belonged to him the moment he entered it. At 47, the founder of Wallace Motion Systems wore a tailored navy suit, a platinum watch, and the easy smile of someone whose name appeared regularly in business magazines. His company manufactured precision components for automotive plants across North America, and tonight he was one of the summit's largest sponsors. Beside him sat 4 distinguished guests from Japan, their interpreter quietly reviewing documents while waitstaff refreshed water glasses. Grant wasn't looking at them anymore. He was looking directly at a woman standing a few feet away. She looked nothing like the executives surrounding her. Her charcoal work jacket had faded at the elbows from years of use. Comfortable black shoes replaced expensive leather loafers. A weathered canvas tool bag rested against one leg, its corners softened by time. A small silver gear-shaped pin caught the light on one of the straps, though few people noticed it. The woman simply stood there. Her posture was straight, her expression calm. Her name was Evelyn Carter. She was 52 years old. Grant tilted his head, as though examining an unexpected stain on a clean tablecloth. "I'm serious," he said loudly enough for nearby conversations to stop. "The maintenance entrance isn't through the VIP reception." A few uncomfortable chuckles floated through the room. Someone near the back whispered, "Who invited her?" Another quietly shrugged. No one answered. Evelyn looked at Grant with steady eyes that had seen harder mornings than this one. "I believe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," she replied. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Grant smiled wider. "You lost?" "No." "You sure?" She reached into her jacket pocket and produced a cream-colored invitation embossed with the summit's gold seal. "My invitation says the Grand Ballroom." Grant barely glanced at it. "You'd be surprised what people pick up from unattended registration tables." Another ripple of laughter. Not cruel, not kind. The nervous laughter of people relieved that someone else was standing in the spotlight instead of them. Nearly 200 executives filled the ballroom. Presidents, investors, manufacturing leaders, law firms, consultants, board members. Several recognized immediately that the invitation looked authentic. None of them said a word. Silence is easier when someone else is paying the bills. Grant folded his arms. "So tell me." He looked toward the Japanese delegation. "You here to fix the microphones?" A few guests smiled. Others looked away. One woman lowered her eyes into her wine glass. Another pretended to answer an email she wasn't reading. The room had suddenly become fascinated with anything except the woman standing alone. Evelyn slipped the invitation back into her pocket. I was invited. By whom? The organizing committee. Grant laughed. That's adorable. He gestured toward the polished floor. People like us have schedules to keep. People like us. The words lingered longer than the laughter. Evelyn's eyes drifted across the ballroom. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Detroit River, where late afternoon sunlight shimmered across the water. Beyond the glass, freight trains crawled through old industrial neighborhoods that had built generations of American manufacturing. Inside, polished shoes walked across floors laid by workers whose names no one remembered. She had spent enough years in places like this to recognize the pattern. People decided who belonged long before anyone spoke. Grant stepped closer. What company are you with? Carter Community Repair Kitchen. He blinked. What? It's a nonprofit workshop in Detroit. Oh. He nodded slowly, pretending to understand. So charity. We teach adults technical repair skills. Grant grinned. So, junk repair. A louder laugh this time. He looked around as if inviting the ballroom to enjoy the joke with him. Several accepted. Others remained frozen. Still, nobody intervened. One waiter paused beside a table, tray balanced carefully in one hand. He looked at Evelyn, then at Grant, then quietly continued walking. The orchestra in the corner had stopped rehearsing without anyone telling them to. Even the soft clinking of glasses faded. Grant pointed toward Evelyn's canvas bag. What have you got in there? My belongings. You carrying tools? Some. You planning to repair my investors? The joke landed again. He was enjoying himself now. Power often mistakes audience approval for correctness. One of the Japanese executives exchanged a glance with another. Neither laughed. Grant noticed. He quickly recovered. Turning toward them, he smiled broadly. My apologies. Then he lowered his voice just enough to sound theatrical. We sometimes get people wandering into these events. Evelyn answered before anyone else could. I didn't wander. Grant looked back. You still here? I haven't been asked to leave by anyone with the authority to do so. Something shifted behind his smile. People accustomed to instant surrender rarely know what to do with quiet resistance. He wasn't angry yet. He was annoyed. A dangerous difference. Grant's eyes dropped toward a folded technical document sticking slightly from Evelyn's canvas bag. Japanese characters covered the visible page. He frowned. What's that? A document. In Japanese? Yes. He laughed again. Oh. Now this keeps getting better. He reached toward the bag. Evelyn gently moved it closer to herself. I'd rather you didn't. What? My property. Grant leaned closer. So now you're collecting Japanese engineering papers? She answered simply. I keep things that matter. The nearest tables had stopped eating entirely. Forks rested halfway to plates. A bartender wiped the same glass 3 times without noticing. Someone near the back quietly lifted a phone beneath the table. Recording had already begun. Grant's voice grew louder. Let me guess. He looked toward the delegation. She probably thinks she speaks Japanese. A few forced laughs. Evelyn didn't react. I understand Japanese. Grant stared, then burst into the loudest laugh yet. It rolled across the ballroom. Even people who hadn't heard the earlier exchange turned toward the sound. You? He wiped an imaginary tear from his eye. I'm sorry. No. He shook his head. This is too good. You understand Japanese? Yes. Grant looked directly at the Japanese delegation. Ladies and gentlemen, he spread both hands dramatically. Our mystery guest apparently speaks your language. The room waited. Kenji Sato, chairman of the visiting consortium, observed quietly without interrupting. His expression revealed nothing. Grant continued, "I'll make you a deal." He reached into his inside pocket and produced a leather checkbook. "If you can speak one complete sentence in Japanese." He paused for effect. "I'll donate $300,000. The number landed like dropped steel. 300,000. Several people inhaled sharply. Grant smiled. "But if you can't," he looked directly into Evelyn's eyes. "You walk out of this ballroom and admit you never belonged here." Silence. Complete silence. The kind that settles over a room when everyone realizes something irreversible has just been said. Nearly 200 people watched. Not one stepped forward. Not one objected. Not one said the bet itself was wrong. Evelyn lowered her gaze for only a second. Her fingers brushed the small silver gear pin attached to the strap of her old canvas bag. The metal felt cool beneath her fingertips. Worn smooth by years, she remembered another room, another night, another silence. Then she looked back at Grant. Her face showed neither anger nor embarrassment, only certainty. "If you're serious," she said quietly, "put the bet in writing." For the first time all evening, someone else moved before Grant could answer. Kenji Sato's eyes had never left the small silver gear pin. His polite expression changed almost imperceptibly. Not recognition. Not yet. Something closer to memory. He leaned forward. His gaze remained fixed on the tiny piece of metal hanging from Evelyn's weathered canvas bag, as though he had seen it somewhere long ago, somewhere impossible. And suddenly, the $300,000 no longer felt like the biggest thing waiting inside that ballroom. Only hours earlier, before polished marble floors and crystal chandeliers, before expensive suits and quiet humiliation, Evelyn Carter had begun her day where most of Detroit never appeared on glossy corporate brochures. The bus sighed to a stop beneath gray morning clouds. Cold autumn air slipped through the folding doors as passengers climbed aboard one by one, carrying lunch pails, backpacks, toolboxes, grocery bags, and the invisible weight of another workday. Evelyn stepped inside with her weathered canvas bag resting against one shoulder. She greeted the driver with the same warm smile she offered every Tuesday. "Morning, Curtis." The driver looked up from his console and smiled back. "Morning, Miss Carter. Workshop day?" She nodded. "Every day is workshop day." Curtis chuckled as she tapped her transit card. "You still fixing half this city?" "I'm trying to teach people to fix things themselves." "Better answer." She moved toward the rear of the crowded bus. Factories had changed over the decades, but morning buses hadn't. Steel-toed boots, coffee and paper cups, tired shoulders, people staring quietly through fogged windows while Detroit rolled past. Old brick buildings stood beside fresh construction projects. Church steeples rose above neighborhoods where generations had worked with their hands. Auto plants stretched across the horizon like sleeping giants. The city carried its scars proudly. So did many of the people riding beside her. Evelyn found an empty seat near the middle. She rested her canvas bag on her lap. One hand instinctively brushed the small silver gear pin attached to the strap. The metal had dulled over the years. Most people assumed it came from an old union convention or retirement banquet. No one had ever asked. Perhaps that was easier. The bus pulled away from the curb. Its engine hummed steadily beneath the floor. Outside, rain from the previous night still shimmered on cracked sidewalks. A man boarded 3 stops later. He wore a reflective warehouse vest beneath a heavy coat. His left wrist had swollen noticeably. He winced each time the bus lurched forward. Every seat was occupied. Before he could grab the overhead rail, Evelyn was already standing. "Take mine." The man shook his head. "No, ma'am. You need it more." "I'll be all right." She smiled gently. That's what people say right before they fall. A few nearby passengers smiled. He finally accepted. Thank you. As he lowered himself into the seat, pain crossed his face. Evelyn noticed immediately. May I see your wrist? He hesitated. I'm not a doctor. She smiled again. But I've wrapped enough injuries to know swelling when I see it. He carefully extended his arm. She opened the side pocket of her old canvas bag. Inside sat neatly folded cloth bandages, antiseptic wipes, a small elastic wrap, and several basic first aid supplies. Nothing expensive, just practical. She cleaned a small scrape near his thumb before wrapping the wrist carefully. Her movements were slow, confident. The practiced motions of someone who had spent years solving problems instead of talking about them. There. She secured the wrap, not too tight. He rotated his wrist slightly. It already feels better. You should still get it checked. He reached into his wallet. Please. She gently pushed the folded bills back toward him. I wasn't selling anything. No, but buy yourself lunch instead. He looked embarrassed. I appreciate it. Evelyn simply nodded. Across the aisle, an elderly woman smiled quietly. A construction foreman lowered his newspaper. Even Curtis glanced into the mirror near the windshield. Kindness travels faster than conversation. The warehouse worker studied the old canvas bag. You always carry all this? I teach adults. What kind of adults? People starting over. He nodded slowly. Those are the hardest students. They're usually the bravest. Outside, the skyline grew larger. Glass towers rose where old factories once stood. New money beside old neighborhoods. Detroit had always known reinvention. The question was, who got remembered afterward? 20 minutes later, Evelyn stepped off the bus near a converted brick building tucked between an abandoned grocery store and a family-owned hardware shop. A faded sign above the entrance read, Carter Community Repair Kitchen. The building had once served hot meals. Now it served second chances. Inside, warm yellow lights filled the old cafeteria. Long stainless steel tables had become repair benches. Shelves overflowed with donated appliances waiting to be rebuilt. Coffee makers, vacuum cleaners, portable heaters, microwaves, power tools. Nothing glamorous. Everything useful. The room smelled faintly of coffee, machine oil, sawdust, and fresh paint. Marcus Reed looked up from a washing machine someone had donated the previous afternoon. At 58, Marcus had the broad shoulders of a man who'd spent decades lifting engines. Gray streaks ran through his beard. His smile appeared the moment he saw Evelyn. You made it. I usually do, he laughed. Barely. He pointed toward the clock. You're 2 minutes late. The bus driver insisted on obeying traffic laws. Marcus pretended to sigh dramatically. Terrible habit. Several adults gathered around nearby work tables looked up. Every one of them greeted Evelyn. Morning, Miss Carter. Good to see you. She knew nearly every name, not because she had an exceptional memory, because remembering people mattered. At one bench, 2 women carefully repaired a broken sewing machine. At another, 3 men disassembled an old dishwasher. Near the windows, a retired electrician coached several recently unemployed factory workers through wiring diagrams. Nobody here was treated like charity. Everyone learned. Everyone taught. Marcus handed Evelyn a cup of coffee. You nervous? She looked toward the paper invitation resting on the workbench. Embossed gold lettering reflected softly beneath the overhead lights. A little. You earned that invitation. She smiled without answering. Marcus watched her. You still thinking about not going? I almost stayed home. He leaned against the table. They're finally recognizing your volunteer program. That's what the letter says. And? She looked around the workshop. A middle-aged woman celebrated quietly after fixing a blender that had defeated her twice the previous week. Another student applauded. Someone laughed. Another pot of coffee began brewing. This place already recognizes me. Marcus understood. Recognition from strangers often arrives years after recognition from neighbors. He noticed her fingers resting once again on the silver gear pin. "You've never told me where that came from." She looked down. The pin caught the workshop lights exactly as it had inside the ballroom hours later. Its tiny teeth formed a perfect gear. At its center rested a faded red circle no larger than a pencil eraser. She gently turned it between her fingers. "It reminds me who survived." Marcus waited. He had known Evelyn nearly 11 years. He recognized the difference between a finished sentence and one protecting an unfinished story. "You ever going to tell me the rest?" "Maybe." "When?" "When it matters." Marcus smiled. "I've learned not to rush you." She slipped the pin back against the canvas strap. Nearby, one of the students raised a hand. "Miss Carter?" She walked over immediately. "What have you got?" "I can't figure out why this compressor keeps shutting off." She crouched beside him. "Tell me what you've already checked." He explained. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked another question, and another. She never reached for the tool herself. She guided his thinking instead. 5 minutes later, his eyes widened. "The relay?" She nodded. "You found it?" He laughed. "I would have never looked there." "You would have eventually." "No. I just needed someone to ask the right questions." She smiled. "Most people don't need answers. They need someone who believes they're capable of finding them." Marcus watched quietly from across the room. That was Evelyn. She never repaired only machines. She repaired confidence. An hour later, after helping 3 more students, Evelyn finally picked up the invitation. Marcus folded his arms. "Ready?" She looked at the address. Great Lakes Automotive Summit, Grand Ballroom, Detroit River Convention Center, recognition ceremony. She inhaled slowly. "I suppose." Marcus reached into a cabinet and removed a clean cloth. He wiped a faint smudge from her canvas bag. "There," she laughed softly. "Still looks 20 years old." "So do some of the best mechanics." He opened the front door. Morning sunlight filtered through gathering clouds. Before stepping outside, Evelyn paused. Her fingers rested once more against the little silver gear pin. Just for a moment. Long enough that Marcus noticed. Long enough that he almost asked another question. Instead, he simply watched her leave. Neither of them realized that by sunset, nearly 200 strangers would be staring at that same tiny piece of silver, or that one man from Japan would recognize it long before anyone else understood why. Evelyn reached the Detroit River Convention Center shortly after noon. The building rose above the waterfront in sheets of glass and brushed steel, reflecting a pale sky broken by fast-moving clouds. Black sedans glided beneath the covered entrance. Valets opened doors before tires had fully stopped. Men in fitted suits stepped onto the curb, while assistants hurried behind them carrying tablets, garment bags, and coffee cups with handwritten names. Evelyn arrived on foot from the bus stop 2 blocks away. The wind off the river tugged at her jacket and pressed the canvas bag against her hip. She paused beneath the long silver awning, watching a line of luxury vehicles empty into the lobby. For a moment, she considered turning around. Not because she was afraid of the people inside, because she knew what rooms like this could take from a person before they ever asked a question. She had spent years learning how quickly a name could disappear when someone more powerful decided it was inconvenient. Then she remembered Marcus standing in the workshop doorway. "You earned that invitation." Evelyn tightened her grip on the bag and entered. Warm air met her first. Then the smell of polished stone, fresh flowers, and expensive coffee. The main lobby stretched 3 stories high. A suspended sculpture made of chrome engine parts rotated slowly above the registration area. Digital screens displayed concept vehicles, factory automation systems, and photographs of executives shaking hands beneath bold promises about the future of American manufacturing. A wide blue carpet led to 6 registration counters. Each line moved quickly. Badges printed, hands shaken, smiles offered. Evelyn chose the shortest line and waited. The woman behind the counter wore a black blazer and a headset. Her name badge read, Laura Bennett, Event Operations Director. Laura greeted the man ahead of Evelyn before he even reached the desk. Mr. Donnelly, welcome back. Your panel begins at 2:15. She handed him a gold-edged badge and pointed him toward the escalators. When Evelyn stepped forward, Laura's smile remained in place for half a second. Then it weakened. Vendor check-in is downstairs, she said. I'm not a vendor. Laura's eyes moved over the faded jacket, the practical shoes, and the weathered bag. Catering staff uses the east entrance. I'm not catering staff either. The smile vanished completely. What can I help you with? I'm here for the summit. Laura looked past Evelyn toward the line forming behind her. Do you have a delivery? I have an invitation. Evelyn removed the cream-colored card from her pocket and placed it carefully on the counter. Laura glanced down. The gold seal caught the overhead light. Her expression shifted, but not toward welcome, toward suspicion. Where did you get this? It was mailed to me. Laura lifted the invitation and examined both sides. Your name? Evelyn Carter. Laura typed it into the computer. Nothing appeared immediately. She tried again. Then she checked a printed list beside the keyboard. Evelyn watched her eyes travel down the page. They stopped. Laura looked up, then back down, then up again. Do you have identification? Evelyn handed over her driver's license. Laura compared the photograph. The name matched, the address matched. Still, she did not print the badge. Instead, she picked up her phone and called someone. Hi, this is Laura at registration. I have an Evelyn Carter here. A pause. No, not media. Another pause. I'm looking at the list. Yes, I see it. She turned slightly away, lowering her voice. No, I just wanted to confirm there wasn't another person with the same name. Evelyn stood quietly, while 3 people in the next line received their badges without being asked for identification. A silver-haired executive laughed with the clerk at the neighboring desk. A consultant wearing jeans and white sneakers was welcomed by name. A young technology founder arrived carrying no invitation at all and was waved through after mentioning the company that employed him. Laura ended the call. The invitation is valid. Evelyn waited. Laura still did not print the badge. Was there another problem? No. Laura's fingers hovered over the keyboard. It's just unusual. What is? Laura looked uncomfortable. This category of invitation is normally reserved for recognized contributors and industry advisors. Evelyn's voice remained level. That is the invitation I received. Yes. Laura glanced toward the people behind Evelyn again. I'm sure there's an explanation. The words landed softly. That made them worse. Evelyn folded her hands on the counter. May I have my badge? Laura finally pressed the button. A printer beneath the desk hummed. A white card emerged. Evelyn Carter invited contributor VIP Table 4. Laura stared at it longer than necessary before attaching it to a blue ribbon. She handed it over. Your session doesn't begin for several hours. I know. The VIP reception area may be crowded. I expected that. There's a quieter waiting space near the catering corridor. Evelyn looked at her. A waiting space? Just until the opening presentation is finished. Would you ask another invited contributor to wait beside the kitchen? The question was not sharp. It was almost gentle. Laura's face tightened. That isn't what I meant. What did you mean? For a moment, the lobby sounds seemed louder. Rolling suitcases, elevator bells, coffee machines hissing. Laura looked down at the invitation in her hand. She knew the name was valid. She knew the badge category was correct. She knew exactly what Evelyn was asking. Still, she could not answer. A man wearing an exhibitor badge cleared his throat impatiently behind Evelyn. Laura lowered her voice. "I'm only trying to avoid confusion." Evelyn picked up her invitation. "Confusion for whom?" Laura said nothing. Evelyn slipped the badge around her neck. Then she walked toward the escalators. Her pace never changed. Only her right hand tightened around the canvas bag. At the top of the escalator, the summit opened before her in a flood of light and machinery. Prototype vehicles rested on circular platforms. Robotic arms moved inside glass demonstration booths. Engine components gleamed beneath spotlights. Large banners carried words like innovation, leadership, and integrity. Evelyn passed each one without slowing. A few people looked at her badge, then at her clothes, then back at the badge. Some assumed she was part of a community outreach display. Others decided the event organizers had invited her for appearances. No one asked what she had built. No one asked what she knew. Near the ballroom entrance, an older man in a dark gray suit stumbled slightly as the heel of his shoe caught the edge of the carpet. The folder beneath his arm slipped open, sending papers across the floor. Several executives stepped around him. Evelyn immediately set down her bag. "Easy." She steadied his elbow and gathered the scattered documents before anyone could tread on them. "Thank you," the man said, embarrassed. "You're welcome." He studied her badge. "Invited contributor? That's what it says." He smiled faintly. "Then I suppose I'll see you inside." He walked away before offering his own name. Evelyn watched him disappear into the crowd. Even gratitude in places like this often lasted only until the crisis passed. The ballroom doors opened at 1 o'clock. Warm amber light spilled across the carpet. Inside, round tables surrounded a raised stage beneath an enormous wall of glass overlooking the river. White orchids stood in tall arrangements. Screens behind the podium displayed the summit logo above the words, "Building the Next Era." Evelyn checked the seating chart. Table 4. Japanese Automotive Consortium. Her name appeared clearly beneath the list of guests. She found the table near the front. 4 place settings had been arranged for the Japanese delegation. 3 American executives would join them. At the remaining seat rested a white card, Evelyn Carter. She touched it lightly. There it was, proof that someone had expected her. For the first time since arriving, her shoulders loosened. She set her canvas bag beside the chair and stepped toward the refreshment station for water. She was gone less than 2 minutes. When she returned, her name card had disappeared. The chair remained. The plate remained. The folded napkin remained. But the card was gone. Evelyn searched the table, then the floor. She found it 20 feet away beside a silver service tray near the wall. Someone had placed it face down between a stack of unused menus and a bucket holding melting ice. Evelyn picked it up. A drop of water had darkened one corner. She wiped it gently with her sleeve. Behind her, a man spoke. "That seat is reserved." She turned. Grant Wallace stood beside table 4, one hand resting on the back of her chair. She recognized him from summit advertisements and business articles. His smile carried no warmth. "My name was on it," Evelyn said. Grant glanced at the damp place card in her hand. "That must be a clerical mistake. The seating chart says otherwise." He looked toward Laura, who had entered the ballroom with a tablet. Laura saw the card. She saw Evelyn. She saw Grant. Then she stopped several yards away, close enough to help, far enough to pretend she had not heard. Grant leaned closer to Evelyn. "These tables are for serious industry discussions. So I understand. Not community outreach. My invitation lists me as a contributor." Grant's smile thinned. "Titles can be generous." Evelyn placed the card back at the empty setting. She straightened it carefully until it aligned with the plate. Grant watched her fingers. You really want to do this? I want to sit in the seat assigned to me. The ballroom had begun filling. Several guests noticed the exchange. None approached. Grant looked around at the growing audience. Something in his expression brightened. This was no longer an inconvenience. It was an opportunity. He lifted Evelyn's name card from the table once more. Then he set it beside the service tray with deliberate care. No, he said quietly. I think someone needs to explain how rooms like this work. Evelyn met his eyes. She did not move the card again. Not yet. But Grant mistook her stillness for surrender. And with nearly 200 guests beginning to take their seats, he decided the lesson should be public. He lifted one hand toward the nearest cluster of executives. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, his voice carrying easily beneath the glass ceiling, we seem to have a seating issue. Conversations slowed. A few people turned fully in their chairs. Others remained half-turned, pretending not to watch while watching every detail. Evelyn stood beside table 4 with her damp name card still resting near the service tray. Her canvas bag leaned against her leg. The silver gear pin caught a thin blade of afternoon light from the river. Grant pointed toward the card. This seat is reserved for the Japanese delegation and senior industry partners. My name is on the seating chart, Evelyn said. Her tone remained calm. Grant smiled. Yes, you've mentioned that. He turned toward the crowd. She says she represents a neighborhood repair kitchen. A few guests laughed uncertainly. Grant continued. Apparently, we're now inviting people who fix broken toasters to advise international manufacturers. The laughter grew louder. Not much. Just enough. Evelyn's face did not change, but something tightened in her chest. She thought of the repair kitchen that morning, of the unemployed machinist who had spent 6 months believing his hands were no longer useful, of the woman rebuilding a sewing machine because replacing it would cost half her weekly pay, of the adults who came through the doors carrying years of rejection and left with one machine working and one piece of confidence restored. Grant had reduced all of them to a joke in a single sentence. Evelyn let the pain pass through her without letting it control her. We teach technical diagnosis, electrical safety, and industrial repair, she said. The work is real, even when the room is modest. Grant looked delighted. You hear that? Industrial repair. He leaned toward a nearby executive. Maybe she can help when the coffee machine jams. More laughter. Laura Bennett stood near the ballroom entrance, holding her tablet against her chest. She had verified Evelyn's invitation. She had seen the name on the seating list. She could end this with one sentence. Ms. Carter is an invited contributor. Instead, she remained still. Her eyes met Evelyn's for half a second, then dropped. Evelyn understood. Laura was afraid. Grant's company had paid for the summit's technology pavilion, the keynote dinner, and nearly half the foreign delegation's travel expenses. His logo appeared on every program, every screen, every bottle of water. Truth had entered the room. Money had already taken its seat. Grant reached for Evelyn's canvas bag. What else do you carry around in this thing? Evelyn moved it behind her leg. My belongings. You've been asked before. No lawful reason has been given. The smile left Grant's face. He looked toward the security staff near the ballroom doors. Thomas. A tall man in a charcoal suit approached. His badge identified him as Thomas Blake, security supervisor. He appeared to be in his late 40s, with close-cropped hair and the guarded expression of someone trained to keep difficult situations from becoming public. This situation was already public. Grant pointed toward Evelyn. Search the bag. Thomas stopped. Sir? You heard me. Thomas looked at Evelyn, then at the bag, then at the blue VIP badge hanging around her neck. Has anything been reported missing? No. Any prohibited item observed? Grant's jaw tightened. She's causing a disruption. Thomas looked around. The disruption consisted of one woman standing quietly while a millionaire spoke over her. "Miss Carter," Thomas said carefully, "may I ask whether you consent to a bag inspection?" "No," Evelyn replied. Grant laughed once. "There, that tells you everything." Evelyn kept her eyes on Thomas. "I have committed no violation. My invitation is valid. My name appears on the seating chart. Unless you have a specific safety concern, I do not consent to being searched for someone else's comfort." Thomas hesitated. He had spent years dealing with aggressive guests, intoxicated donors, and executives who believed policies were tools to use against other people. Evelyn was none of those things. Her voice was steady, her hands were visible, her badge was valid. Thomas turned to Grant. "I don't have grounds to search her." The ballroom shifted. It was small, but everyone felt it. Grant's authority had been questioned, not loudly, not dramatically. That made it worse. "You work for this event," Grant said. "I work under event security policy. And I fund this event." Thomas held his gaze. "That doesn't change the policy." For the first time, several guests looked relieved. Someone had finally said no. But the relief lasted only seconds. Grant turned toward Laura. "Is this woman supposed to be here?" Laura's throat tightened. Every eye moved to her. She could no longer pretend she had not seen. She approached slowly. "Yes," she said. The word was barely audible. Grant leaned closer. "What?" Laura glanced at Evelyn, then at the crowd. "Her invitation is valid." There it was, the truth, simple, clear, late. Grant's expression hardened. "And the seating assignment?" Laura looked at the tablet. "It lists her at table 4. Evelyn waited. No apology came, no correction. No one returned her card. Grant glanced at the Japanese delegation. Kenji Sato sat quietly, his hands folded near a closed leather portfolio. Beside him were his wife, Aiko Sato, and two senior consortium executives, Hiroshi Tanaka and Naomi Fujimori. All four were adults, seasoned enough to recognize humiliation, even when delivered beneath polite lighting. None of them laughed. Grant noticed and shifted tactics. Obviously, the organizing committee made a symbolic choice. Laura started to speak. Grant cut her off. "Community inclusion, outreach, fine." He turned back to Evelyn. "But this is a business table. We're discussing supplier agreements, plant automation, and international manufacturing risk." His eyes moved down her jacket. "Not broken refrigerators." Evelyn felt the old wound stir. Not anger, memory. A conference room 18 years earlier, a supervisor closing a folder. A man telling her the final report needed a name clients would trust. Her own signature disappearing from a page. She pressed one thumb against the canvas strap until she felt the edge of the silver pin. Then she released it. "What do you believe qualifies someone for this table?" she asked. Grant spread his hands. "Experience." "I have experience." "Credentials." "I have credentials." "Then show them." "I already showed my invitation." "That isn't a credential." "No," Evelyn said. "It is proof that someone expected me." The sentence quieted the nearest tables. Grant stared at her. She had not raised her voice once. He could not make her look frightened. He could not make her look foolish. So he decided to take something from her. His hand shot toward the canvas bag. Before Evelyn could pull it away, Grant caught the edge of a folded document protruding from the outer pocket and yanked it free. The paper opened as he lifted it. Dense Japanese text covered the upper half. Beneath it sat an engineering schematic drawn in black and red ink. Evelyn's composure cracked for the first time. Not visibly to most of the room, only in the sharpness of her breath. "Return that." Grant looked down at the page. "What is this?" "My property," Japanese? Yes. He held it higher. Several guests craned their necks. One phone rose openly now, another followed. Evelyn stepped forward. Mr. Wallace, give it back. Grant's eyebrows lifted. The first clear demand she had made. He enjoyed it. So this is what you carry into VIP events? He scanned the page without understanding it. A little prop? No. A souvenir? No. He turned the schematic sideways. Near the lower corner, a handwritten red mark crossed a pressure line and redirected it toward a secondary valve. Kenji saw it. His body went still. The ballroom around him faded. For one brief second, he was no longer seated in Detroit, beneath chandeliers and corporate banners. He was somewhere darker. Somewhere filled with alarms, smoke, and men shouting across a factory floor. His eyes locked on the red mark. Not the language, not the diagram, the mark itself. A short angled line, 3 numbers written beside it. A tiny circle drawn around a valve symbol. He had seen that correction before. Grant waved the paper. You actually expect anyone to believe you understand this? Evelyn's voice lowered. I expect you to return it. Why? Because it does not belong to you. Grant looked around the room. Nearly 200 people watched. Laura stood frozen. Thomas remained nearby, tense but uncertain. The executives at surrounding tables said nothing. Some were afraid of Grant. Some were entertained. Some convinced themselves that Evelyn could handle it because she appeared calm. That was the cruel bargain of dignity. The more gracefully a person carried mistreatment, the easier it became for others to pretend help was unnecessary. Grant smiled at the crowd. Let's settle this, he pointed to the Japanese writing. She claims she belongs at this table. Evelyn's eyes remained on the schematic. Grant continued. She claims she has credentials. No one moved. She carries around documents she probably can't even read. Kenji's gaze shifted from the red correction to the silver gear pin on Evelyn's bag. The pin was partly turned now. For the first time, he could see a faint engraving along its edge. His breath shortened. Grant looked directly at Evelyn. So tell us. He tapped the Japanese text with one finger. What does it say? Evelyn did not answer immediately. She looked around the ballroom. At Laura, who had known the truth but waited. At Thomas, who had resisted but had not yet intervened further. At the executives whose faces showed discomfort without courage. At the phones recording what no person had tried to stop. Then she looked at Grant. You have already decided I cannot tell you. Grant smiled. Prove me wrong. The room remained silent. And while everyone waited for Evelyn to defend her intelligence, Kenji Sato kept staring at the red mark in the corner of the stolen schematic, because he was beginning to remember the night it had first been drawn. Grant Wallace held the paper between 2 fingers, as if it were evidence against her. What does it say? He repeated. Evelyn looked at the document in his hand, then at the faces surrounding them. The ballroom had become unnaturally still. The soft ventilation hum overhead sounded louder than before. Ice shifted in untouched glasses. Somewhere near the back, a server set down a tray so carefully that even the faint click of metal against wood seemed to travel across the room. Grant mistook the silence for support. He smiled. Come on, he said. 1 sentence. Evelyn did not respond. He turned toward the Japanese delegation. Mr. Sato, I apologize for this distraction. Some people will claim almost anything when they think nobody can verify it. Kenji kept his eyes on Evelyn. Her face had changed very little, but he noticed what Grant did not. She was not searching for words. She was deciding whether the room deserved them. Grant pulled a pen from his jacket. You wanted the bet in writing. He reached for a clean summit program on the table, turned it over, and wrote in large, impatient strokes. I, Grant Wallace, will donate $300,000 to an organization chosen by Evelyn Carter if she demonstrates that she can speak and understand Japanese well enough to explain the document in her possession. He paused, then added another sentence. If she cannot, she agrees to leave the Great Lakes Automotive Summit and publicly admit that she misrepresented her qualifications. Grant signed beneath the statement with a flourish. He slid the paper across the table. There. Evelyn read every line. Laura stepped closer. Mr. Wallace, perhaps we should... Grant raised one hand without looking at her. You verified her invitation. Now we're verifying the rest. Laura fell silent again. Thomas Blake watched from the edge of the gathering crowd. His shoulders had stiffened. He could stop a physical disturbance. He could remove an unauthorized person. He could enforce written policy. But no policy told him what to do when humiliation wore a sponsor badge. Grant held out the pen. Sign. Evelyn looked at him. You left something out. His smile weakened. What? The donation must be unrestricted. Grant gave a short laugh. Fine. And no one connected to your company may delay, redirect, or cancel it. Several executives exchanged glances. Grant's pride would not let him retreat now. He added the condition. Anything else? Yes. Evelyn pointed toward the room. Everyone here should hear the terms. Grant lifted the paper and read it aloud. His voice carried to the farthest tables. By the time he finished, phones were raised openly. The private humiliation had become a public contract. Grant placed the pen in front of Evelyn. She signed. Evelyn Carter. Her handwriting was clean and steady. Grant took back the agreement. He said, Say something. Evelyn turned toward Kenji. For the first time, she addressed him directly. Grant expected hesitation. Instead, Evelyn spoke in Japanese. Her voice was calm and measured, neither hurried nor showy. The sounds flowed with the ease of long familiarity. She greeted Kenji formally, apologized for the disruption, and asked whether he preferred that she discuss the schematic as a technical document or as a record of a past emergency. No one in the ballroom understood every word. They did not need to. The effect on the Japanese delegation told them enough. Naomi Fujimori's eyes widened. Hiroshi Tanaka slowly lowered the water glass in his hand. Aiko Sato looked from Evelyn to her husband with quiet surprise. Kenji's expression changed most of all. The older cadence, the careful honorifics, the slightly regional pronunciation of certain technical terms. He had heard that manner of speaking before, not recently, not in a boardroom, somewhere louder, somewhere dangerous. Grant forced a laugh. That sounded impressive. No one joined him. He looked around. What? We're taking her word for it? Kenji turned to him. She spoke correctly. Grant's smile froze. Correctly how? Fluently. A murmur moved through the room. Grant straightened his jacket. One memorized sentence proves nothing. Evelyn remained facing Kenji. He asked her a question in Japanese. This one was longer. He wanted to know where she had learned the language and why her vocabulary carried traces of industrial training common in central Japan nearly 2 decades earlier. Evelyn answered without pause. She explained that she had worked alongside Japanese engineers for several years, first through technical manuals and translation sessions, then through night shifts, emergency drills, shared meals, and long conversations on factory floors. Kenji listened carefully. Grant interrupted. What did she say? Naomi answered in English. She explained how she learned. And we're supposed to believe that? Naomi's expression cooled. You asked whether she could speak Japanese. I asked whether she understood it. She does. Grant tapped the schematic. Conversational language is not engineering language. Evelyn turned toward him. You are changing the test. I'm making it meaningful. The written terms say I must explain the document. Then explain it. Grant placed the schematic flat on the table, but kept one hand over the upper corner as if he still owned it. Evelyn did not reach for the page. Instead, She looked at Kenji. Would you like to ask the question? The courtesy carried more authority than Grant's shouting. Kenji nodded. He spoke again in Japanese. This time the words were technical. He asked Evelyn to identify the system shown on the page, explain the function of the secondary airflow channel, and describe why the handwritten correction differed from the printed design. The four Japanese guests watched her closely. Around them, nearly 200 people leaned into the silence. Evelyn stepped beside the table. She did not touch the schematic. Not yet. This drawing shows part of a ventilation and vapor control system used in an automotive coating facility, she said in Japanese. Naomi translated quietly for the room. Evelyn continued. The main intake line feeds the Western Assembly Zone. The printed design routes pressure through a central regulator before releasing excess flow through the primary exhaust channel. Grant folded his arms. Anyone could study a page. That was what he told himself. Evelyn pointed toward a narrow section of the diagram without touching the paper. The problem is here, Naomi translated. The regulator was sized for ordinary production load, but during a full shutdown, vapor would continue moving from the coating chamber while the primary exhaust slowed. Pressure would build faster than the system could release it. Hiroshi leaned forward. Kenji's eyes never left Evelyn. She went on. The secondary channel was drawn as an emergency release, but the valve direction was wrong. Under stress, it would not open outward. It would pull contaminated air back toward the west line. A low murmur passed through several American engineers. They could follow the diagram now. One man near the front stood from his chair to see more clearly. Grant noticed. His confidence began to thin. Convenient, he said. She's reading lines on paper. Evelyn looked at him. The pressure values aren't visible from where I'm standing. Grant looked down. They were not. Tiny figures near the lower edge were covered by his own hand. He moved it away. The crowd reacted before he could hide his mistake. Evelyn continued in Japanese. The emergency override was set to trigger too late. By the time the alarm registered, the west line would already be above safe pressure. Kenji asked another question. What would you change? Evelyn's eyes moved toward the handwritten red correction. For a fraction of a second, something painful crossed her face. The printed bypass could not be trusted, she said, so the pressure had to be redirected manually through the service valve and into the inactive north duct. Hiroshi whispered something to Naomi. Aiko touched Kenji's sleeve. Grant heard only Japanese voices moving around him, and for the first time that evening, he was the one outside the conversation. He disliked the feeling immediately. He stepped closer. Ask her something that isn't on the page. Kenji looked at him. Grant pointed toward Evelyn. If she really knows this system, ask her something only someone who worked with it would know. The sentence changed the room. Evelyn's gaze lifted from the schematic. Kenji studied her. He seemed reluctant now. Not because he doubted her, because the answer might confirm something he was not yet prepared to believe. He asked in Japanese, during an emergency shutdown, what sound would the west regulator make before pressure failure? Several engineers at the table looked surprised. That detail would never appear in a formal drawing. Evelyn closed her eyes. The ballroom vanished for a moment. In its place came metal walls, flashing warning lights, and a deep mechanical vibration traveling through concrete. When she opened her eyes, her voice was quieter. 3 short knocks, she answered in Japanese. Then a pause. Then one long rattle from the upper housing. Kenji's face lost all color. Evelyn continued. The night it failed, the 3rd knock came at 2:14 in the morning. Grant stared at her. No laughter now. Kenji rose halfway from his chair, one hand gripping the table. Evelyn looked at the red mark in the corner of the schematic. The correction was drawn 3 minutes later. The ballroom remained silent. Grant opened his mouth, but no sound came. Kenji slowly sat back down. He had asked for proof. Instead, he had heard a memory. And now he needed to know how Evelyn Carter could remember the exact sound of a machine that had nearly destroyed an Ohio factory 18 years earlier. Kenji Sato remained seated, but his posture had changed. The quiet reserve of an international chairman was gone. In its place was the stillness of a man standing at the edge of something he had buried for years. He looked at Evelyn carefully. Not at her faded jacket, not at the practical shoes, not at the old canvas bag. At her face, searching, comparing. Grant Wallace noticed the shift and moved quickly to reclaim the room. "This proves nothing," he said. His voice came out sharper than before. A few executives glanced at one another. Grant pointed toward the schematic. She could have researched the incident. Kenji did not look at him. The incident was never publicly described in that detail. Grant forced a smile. Then someone told her. Evelyn's gaze remained on the red mark. "No one told me." Grant stepped closer. "Then explain the whole system." "I already have." "No. You described what anyone could learn from technical notes." His finger struck the page. "Tell us what actually went wrong." The demand sounded confident, but fear had entered his voice. Not fear of Evelyn. Fear of losing control in front of the people he needed most. Evelyn drew a slow breath. For 18 years, this drawing had remained folded inside her bag. The paper had softened along the creases. The edges had yellowed. The red ink had faded from bright crimson to the color of dried brick. She had carried it through 2 apartment moves, 1 period of unemployment, countless bus rides, and every long winter morning when she questioned whether the world had room for the person she used to be. Now it lay beneath Grant Wallace's hand. She reached toward it. "Move your hand." Grant did not. "You don't order me around." Evelyn looked directly at him. "You asked for an explanation. I need the page." Thomas Blake took 1 step forward. "Mr. Wallace." The warning was mild. It was enough. Grant lifted his hand. Evelyn picked up the schematic with both hands. Her touch was gentle, almost protective. She carried it to an empty display stand beside the table and spread it beneath the overhead light. The crowd shifted with her. People stood from distant tables. Several engineers moved closer. Phones rose higher. Laura remained near the edge of the gathering, her tablet held against her chest like a shield. Evelyn pointed to the upper left section of the drawing. This was the original intake route. Naomi Fujimori translated her Japanese explanation into English for those who could not follow. The facility used a solvent-based coating process, Evelyn continued. During ordinary production, contaminated air moved from the paint chambers into the central exhaust line. Her finger traced the route. The system depended on 3 regulators maintaining balanced pressure. She moved to the western side of the diagram. This regulator had been replaced 6 months earlier. Hiroshi Tanaka leaned forward. "The W4 housing," he said. Evelyn nodded. The replacement unit was rated correctly on paper, but the upper valve assembly had a manufacturing defect. Under steady load, it behaved normally. She tapped the red mark. During an emergency slowdown, it locked halfway. Several American engineers murmured. One of them, a plant safety consultant named Richard Hale, stepped closer. If it locked halfway, exhaust pressure would back up into the coating chamber. Yes. And the vapor concentration would rise. Yes. Grant folded his arms. You're still reading the diagram. Evelyn ignored him. The printed emergency plan assumed this secondary line would release pressure. She pointed toward a narrow duct. But the valve was installed in the wrong direction. Richard frowned. That would have been caught during inspection. It should have been. Was it documented? No. Grant seized on the answer. Oh, of course not. Evelyn looked at him. The subcontractor marked it as verified without opening the housing. The room quieted again. Grant scoffed. That's a convenient accusation. Kenji spoke at last. It was later confirmed. Grant turned. What? Kenji's voice remained low. The valve had been installed backward. Grant's expression tightened. Evelyn continued. When production stopped unexpectedly, the central exhaust slowed, but vapor continued leaving the western paint chamber. Pressure pushed toward the secondary line. Her finger moved through the system. The backward valve trapped it. Richard stared at the schematic. So the chamber became a sealed pocket. Not completely sealed. Evelyn touched another line. There was one remaining route. The service duct. It ran north from the main system toward an inactive assembly section. But this valve was manual, Richard said. Yes. And on the other side of the control room. Yes. He looked at her. Someone had to open it in person. Evelyn did not answer immediately. A distant memory passed through her eyes. Warning lights, smoke pressing beneath a steel door, a radio crackling with voices that kept cutting out. She returned to the room. The automated override failed at 2:14. Her finger moved to 3 small numbers beside the red correction. The pressure rose above the alarm threshold at 2:16. Kenji's breathing became shallow. Grant heard the certainty in her voice and became more desperate. You said the correction was drawn at 2:17. It was. So you had time to stand there making sketches while everyone else panicked. The cruelty of the question drew a few shocked expressions. Evelyn's face remained calm. I drew the route because the control technician needed to know which valves to open. You expect us to believe you redesigned an industrial safety system in 1 minute? No. She looked at him. I expect you to understand that I'd have been warning them for 3 weeks. The words landed harder than any raised voice could have. Kenji closed his eyes briefly. He remembered the reports, the readings, the contract engineer whose concerns had been moved to the bottom of every meeting agenda. Grant looked around, searching for support. No one laughed now. Evelyn pointed to the red line. This correction bypassed the locked regulator and redirected pressure through the inactive north duct. Richard studied it. But the north duct was disconnected from central monitoring. That is why the override had to be done manually. Who opened it? Evelyn's eyes remained on the paper. A maintenance technician reached the first valve. She paused. He collapsed before reaching the second. The ballroom felt colder. Aiko Sato lowered her gaze. Evelyn continued. I carried him behind the fire barrier and returned to the control corridor. Grant gave a disbelieving shake of his head. You carried a grown man through a factory emergency? Evelyn did not defend herself. She simply said, he could not walk. The answer stripped the question of its mockery. Kenji looked at her. What was his name? Evelyn replied in Japanese. David Miller. Kenji gripped the edge of the table. He remembered David, 46 years old then, a maintenance technician with a wedding ring and a habit of humming old Motown songs during night shifts. No public report had named him. The official summary had referred only to one adult employee treated for smoke exposure. Grant saw Kenji's reaction. For the first time, he began to understand that the story was real. Still, he pushed forward. If you returned to the corridor, how did you know which valve to open? Evelyn turned the schematic slightly. The control panel labels were wrong. Richard looked up sharply. What? The service duct had been modified during an earlier expansion. The physical valves no longer matched the printed sequence. She pointed to 3 handwritten symbols. I marked the corrected order. Kenji whispered, North 2, West Auxiliary, manual release. Evelyn looked at him. Yes. He remembered those words being shouted through a radio. A woman's voice, steady beneath the alarms. Grant stared from one to the other. You knew about this? Kenji did not answer him. He asked Evelyn another question. What happened after the final valve opened? Evelyn looked toward the ballroom windows. Outside, the Detroit River moved beneath the late afternoon light. The pressure fell. Her voice softened. The west chamber cleared slowly. The emergency doors unlocked. Everyone still inside was able to leave. Aiko's eyes glistened. Naomi stopped translating for a moment. The people in the room no longer needed every word explained. They could hear the weight in Evelyn's voice. Grant looked at the schematic again. He searched for some flaw, some escape. Then he pointed toward the red correction. Anyone could add that afterward. Evelyn turned to him. The room reacted with open discomfort now. Even Laura looked stunned. Grant pressed on. There's no date, no signature, nothing proving you made that mark. Kenji stood. His chair moved back across the polished floor with a low scrape. Everyone turned toward him. He walked to the display stand. His eyes rested on the correction. Then he pointed to a tiny red circle near the service valve. Inside the circle were 3 barely visible lines. Do you know what this is? He asked Grant. Grant said nothing. Kenji looked at the crowd. During the emergency, the radios failed in parts of the plant. We used visual marks on copied diagrams to show which instructions had been confirmed. He touched the circle without pressing the paper. 3 lines meant the control room, maintenance corridor, and North Station had all repeated the instruction back. He turned toward Evelyn. Only 4 people knew that system. The ballroom held its breath. Grant's face had begun to pale. Kenji looked down at the handwritten numbers. 217, he said. Evelyn nodded. Kenji's voice grew unsteady. At 217, a woman beside me drew this route in red marker, while smoke came through the control room vents. No one moved. She gave me the diagram and told me to repeat the valve sequence until every station confirmed it. His gaze lifted to Evelyn. I never saw her clearly after the evacuation. She was taken to the medical area before sunrise. Grant swallowed. Kenji stepped closer to the old canvas bag. The silver gear pin hung against the strap, turning slightly beneath the lights. And before the emergency team separated, he said, 7 of us were given a temporary identification marker. He stared at the pin, a silver gear with a red center. The room went completely still. Evelyn's hand moved toward the bag, not to hide the pin, to steady it. Kenji looked at her with a mixture of hope and disbelief. Then he asked the question that would tear open 18 years of silence. May I see what is engraved on the back? No one spoke. The question seemed almost too small for the weight it carried. Nearly 200 people stood motionless beneath the high glass ceiling. Outside, the late afternoon sun reflected off the Detroit River, sending ripples of light across the ballroom walls. Inside, every eye settled on the tiny silver gear pin hanging from the worn strap of Evelyn Carter's canvas bag. Evelyn rested one hand on the bag, not protectively, almost affectionately. She looked at Kenji Sato for several long seconds. His face no longer carried the detached composure of an international executive. Instead, he looked like someone searching an old photograph for a familiar face. Finally, Evelyn nodded. You may. She unclipped the pin carefully. Its metal had been polished smooth by years of quiet habit. One edge showed tiny scratches from countless bus rides, workbenches, and jacket pockets. She placed it gently into Kenji's waiting hands. He handled it with extraordinary care. Not because it was valuable, because memory had made it priceless. He turned it over. His fingers froze. Engraved into the back were 4 simple characters. EC07. The room remained silent. Kenji closed his eyes. For a brief moment, no one existed except the woman standing before him and the tiny piece of silver resting in his palm. When he opened his eyes again, they were no longer searching. They had found what they feared had been lost forever. He looked directly at Evelyn. "Engineer Carter." The words came out barely above a whisper. "It really is you." A murmur spread through the ballroom. Grant Wallace frowned. "What does that mean?" Kenji didn't answer immediately. Instead, he lifted the pin high enough for the Japanese delegation to see. Naomi Fujimori inhaled sharply. Hiroshi Tanaka stood so quickly that his chair slid backward several inches. Aiko Sato pressed both hands lightly against her mouth. All four recognized it. Grant looked from one face to another. "What is everyone looking at?" Kenji finally turned toward the crowd. 18 years ago, he said quietly, our companies formed a temporary emergency engineering team during the construction and commissioning of an automotive coating facility in Ohio. His English carried the measured precision of someone choosing every word carefully. The team consisted of 7 engineers from different organizations. He held up the silver pin. "Ciao." Each member received one of these temporary identification markers. He lowered his eyes to the engraving. EC07. Laura Bennett stepped forward without realizing she had moved. Thomas Blake folded his arms more tightly. Even the servers had stopped pretending to work. Kenji continued. "We believed every member of that team had gone separate ways after the incident." He looked back at Evelyn. "But one person disappeared from every official record." Grant laughed nervously. "This is getting dramatic." No one joined him. He glanced around. The silence answered instead. Kenji walked slowly toward Evelyn. "May I ask you something?" She nodded. "When the pressure alarms began," his voice grew softer. "Who was standing beside the Western control console?" Evelyn answered without hesitation. "David Miller." Kenji nodded slowly. He couldn't reach the emergency shutoff. He was already struggling to breathe. Grant shifted impatiently. "Who is David Miller?" Neither of them looked at him. Kenji asked another question. "What color was the warning light above the secondary regulator?" "Amber first." She paused. "Then red." "And the radio?" "It kept cutting out every 7 or 8 seconds. Kenji's breathing slowed. He wasn't testing her anymore. He was remembering alongside her. "What did you say before opening the bypass route?" Evelyn looked down at the pin. For the first time that evening, emotion touched her voice. "I said," she smiled sadly, "if we wait for permission, people won't make it home tonight." Kenji lowered his head. "I remember." Grant interrupted again. "This proves she was there." He forced another laugh. "So what?" Kenji turned. So? His calmness carried more force than shouting ever could. "The emergency engineering team prevented a catastrophic industrial explosion." Grant shrugged. "Congratulations." Kenji looked disappointed. "You do not understand." "No, I understand perfectly." Grant crossed his arms. "She worked somewhere 18 years ago." He gestured toward Evelyn. "That doesn't explain why she's pretending to belong at my table." Evelyn remained silent. Kenji stared at Grant for a long moment. Then he asked quietly, "Who told you she was pretending?" Grant opened his mouth, closed it, then answered, "Look at her." The words escaped before he could stop them. The ballroom absorbed them like cold rain. Kenji looked slowly at Evelyn. He saw the faded jacket, the practical shoes, the canvas bag, the careful posture of someone who had spent years making herself smaller so other people could remain comfortable. Then he looked back at Grant. "I am." The sentence landed harder than any accusation. Grant felt it. He looked around again. Still no laughter. Richard Hale stepped closer to the schematic. "I've been thinking." Everyone turned toward him. "If Engineer Carter corrected the bypass route, He looked at Kenji. Who received official credit? The question hung heavily in the room. Kenji did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Evelyn. She gave the smallest nod, as though granting permission. Kenji faced the crowd. The official report listed the redesign under the supervising project engineer. And who was that? Richard asked. Kenji hesitated. Victor Langford. Several older executives recognized the name immediately. Grant did too. Langford Industrial? Kenji nodded once. The same. Richard frowned. I met Victor years ago. So did many people. He received an industry safety award for that incident. Kenji's silence became its own answer. Grant blinked. No. Kenji looked at him steadily. The public report named Victor Langford. Richard slowly turned toward Evelyn. Are you saying... He stopped. The question suddenly felt enormous. Evelyn answered anyway. I never received public credit. Laura felt her stomach tighten. Grant stared. Why? Evelyn smiled faintly. You'd have to ask the people writing the reports. Richard looked back at Kenji. Was she left out? Kenji's expression darkened. The investigation changed several times. Why? I was never given a satisfactory explanation. Grant spoke quickly. So nobody knows. I know enough. Kenji's voice carried quiet certainty. I know whose handwriting is on this schematic. He pointed to the red correction. I know whose voice guided the emergency response. He lifted the silver pin again. And now I know whose identification marker survived. The ballroom seemed smaller now, as if the walls themselves had leaned inward to listen. Laura remembered the registration desk, her repeated questions, her hesitation, her suggestion that Evelyn wait near the catering corridor. Heat rose into her face. Thomas Blake remembered almost searching the bag. He looked down briefly, not from guilt alone, from relief that policy had restrained him where instinct had not. Grant refused to surrender the room. This is all history. He spread both hands. What matters tonight is business. Kenji answered immediately. Character is always business. Grant forced another smile. My company builds manufacturing systems. Kenji nodded. And the people who build them matter. Grant laughed again, but this time the sound was thin. We're really going to rewrite history because someone carries an old pin? No. Kenji's eyes never left him. History was rewritten 18 years ago. The sentence settled over the ballroom like falling snow. Evelyn quietly reached for the pin. Kenji placed it back into her hand with both palms. The gesture carried unmistakable respect. Not everyone in the room understood its cultural significance, but everyone understood its dignity. She clipped it carefully back onto her bag. Grant noticed something else. The engraving, EC07. He looked again at the schematic, then at Evelyn, then back to Kenji. A thought finally reached him. Slowly, uncomfortably. If she really was part of that team, he stopped. The implication unfolded by itself. She hadn't stumbled into this ballroom. She had been invited because she belonged. Not as charity, not as symbolism, as someone whose work had shaped an industry. Kenji looked toward the Japanese delegation, then back at Evelyn. There is one question only the seventh engineer can answer. The room grew silent once more. Grant swallowed. Kenji asked softly, after the evacuation, what happened to the original emergency notebook? Evelyn didn't answer immediately. Instead, she slowly opened the largest compartment of her old canvas bag. Every eye followed her hands. She reached inside, past folded bandages, past worn notebooks, past carefully wrapped tools, until her fingers closed around something wrapped in faded blue cloth. She lifted it into the light, and every person in the ballroom suddenly understood that the greatest secret of the evening had not yet been revealed. The object was smaller than Grant expected, Not a legal file, not an award, not some dramatic piece of machinery. It was a weathered black notebook, its corners rounded from age, its cover held closed by a faded blue cloth wrapped twice around it. Evelyn laid it beside the schematic. Kenji did not touch it. He stared at the cloth first, then at the notebook beneath it. "I gave you that cloth," he said. Evelyn nodded. "You tore it from your work shirt." Aiko Sato looked at her husband. Kenji's voice dropped. The control room windows had broken. Her hands were cut from the glass. Evelyn gently untied the cloth. The knot resisted at first, stiff after 18 years. When it finally loosened, she opened the notebook to a page filled with pressure readings, valve numbers, and hurried notes written in both English and Japanese. Several lines had been crossed out. Others were circled in red. At the bottom of one page were 7 initials: KSHTNFDMRBVLEC. Kenji leaned closer. "The emergency log." "The original one," Evelyn said. Grant stared at the initials. If this existed, why wasn't it in the official investigation? Evelyn looked at him. Because the official investigation never wanted it. The ballroom seemed to darken around her. The river remained bright beyond the windows, but Evelyn no longer saw Detroit. She saw Ohio, 18 years earlier, a February night sharp with cold, when snow blew sideways across a factory parking lot and the lights above the western loading bays burned through the storm like pale moons. Evelyn was 34 then. She wore steel-toed boots, navy coveralls, and a yellow contractor badge clipped to her chest. Her hair was pulled back beneath a hard hat. A radio hung from one shoulder. The Ohio plant had been operating for less than a year. Everything still looked new. Fresh paint on the safety rails, clean concrete, bright warning labels. But beneath that newness, Evelyn had heard something wrong for 3 weeks. 3 short knocks, a pause, one long rattle. The W4 regulator made the sound only during production slowdowns. The first time she reported it to Victor Langford, the supervising project engineer. He barely looked up from his laptop. "Pressure systems make noise. This one is cycling unevenly. The readings are within tolerance. During steady production." Victor sighed. He was 53, silver-haired, polished, and already well-known in the industry. He had spent decades learning how to sound patient while dismissing people. "Evelyn, you're a contract engineer. I know my title. Then stay within your assignment." Her assignment was documentation support and safety review. Her calculations, apparently, were acceptable only when they confirmed what permanent employees had already decided. She returned the next morning with a pressure model. The replacement regulator could lock halfway during emergency deceleration. Victor did not read past the first page. "You're building a disaster out of a vibration. I'm showing you a failure path. You're creating delay." Kenji, then the plant's operations liaison, had been present for that meeting. He was 43, new to the American facility, and still learning which warnings were taken seriously and which were quietly buried. He studied Evelyn's figures after the meeting. "You believe the Western line is unsafe. I believe no one has tested it under a full emergency slowdown." Kenji requested a shutdown test. Victor rejected it. Production was already behind schedule. A delay would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. So the plant kept running, and Evelyn kept documenting. 3 weeks later, at 2:14 in the morning, the regulator knocked 3 times. Then came the long rattle. Evelyn was in the engineering office when the first alarm sounded. Amber lights flashed across the ceiling. The radio crackled. "Pressure increase, west coating line." She was already moving. By the time she reached the control corridor, the amber warning had turned red. Operators crowded around the central panel. Numbers climbed across the display. A technician shouted that the automatic release had failed. Victor stood near the console, staring at the screen. What happened? Evelyn pushed beside him. The W4 valve locked. You don't know that. The upper housing rattled again. Smoke curled beneath the corridor door. Evelyn pointed toward the pressure graph. The vapor is backing into the chamber. Victor grabbed the radio. Shut down the west line. It is shutting down, an operator answered. Pressure is still climbing. The lights flickered. Somewhere deeper in the plant, a siren began to pulse. Adult workers moved toward marked exits while supervisors tried to keep the evacuation orderly. No one ran at first. Then the smell reached them. Solvent, hot metal, electrical smoke. The radio exploded with overlapping voices. David Miller, the maintenance technician, was already near the Western Service corridor. I can reach the manual release, he said. Evelyn took the radio. Not the printed sequence. Victor turned on her. What? The labels are wrong. He stared. She had found the mismatch during her earlier inspections. The service duct had been modified, but the control labels had never been updated. Evelyn pulled the emergency notebook from her pocket and began drawing. Red marker across the printed route. North 2, West Auxiliary, manual release. She circled each instruction and drew 3 short lines beside the final valve. Kenji stood at her shoulder, repeating the sequence in Japanese to the technicians stationed along the northern section. David reached the first valve. Then his voice disappeared into coughing. Evelyn heard metal strike concrete through the radio. David? No answer. She moved toward the corridor. Victor caught her arm. You're not authorized to enter. She pulled free. He's down. The emergency team is coming. They're 6 minutes away. You don't know what's in there. I know exactly what's in there. She opened the fire door. Smoke pressed through the gap. Kenji followed as far as the barrier. Evelyn. If we wait for permission, she said, people won't make it home tonight. She disappeared into the corridor. Visibility was low, but the emergency lights still cut red paths along the floor. She found David near the first valve, conscious but unable to stand. He was 46, heavy-set, and stronger than Evelyn, but fear and smoke had emptied the strength from his legs. She dragged one of his arms across her shoulders. Can you walk? I think so. You don't have to think. Just move with me. They staggered toward the fire barrier. Each step felt too slow. Behind them, metal groaned. Kenji reached through the doorway and helped pull David to safety. Evelyn lowered him against the wall. Then she turned back. Victor blocked the entrance. That's enough. The second valve is still closed. The emergency crew will handle it. The chamber doesn't have 6 minutes. You are not going back. Evelyn looked toward the control panel. Pressure had crossed the final safe line. Then open it yourself. Victor did not move. That was the answer. Evelyn took the radio, covered her mouth with Kenji's torn blue work cloth, and went back through the fire door. She followed the red floor lights to the manual station. The labels were wrong, exactly as she had warned. She found North 2 by position, not name. The wheel resisted. She pulled until the muscles in her shoulders burned. Nothing. Then it shifted. 1 inch, 2, the line above her shuddered. North 2 open, she said into the radio. A voice repeated the instruction from the control room. 1 confirmation, then another from the maintenance station. Then Kenji's voice from the barrier. 3 stations. Evelyn drew 3 lines beside the valve instruction. Next came West Auxiliary. The handle turned more easily. The pressure display in the control room began to slow, but the final release remained closed. She reached it at 2:17. The metal wheel was hot through her gloves. Behind the wall, the trapped vapor groaned inside the ductwork. She pulled. The wheel did not move. She braced 1 boot against the wall and pulled again. For 1 terrible second, nothing happened. Then the valve broke loose. Air rushed through the duct with a deep mechanical roar. The pressure dropped. Slowly at first, then faster. The alarms changed tone. The western chamber began to clear. By 2:22, every adult worker still inside had reached an evacuation point. By 2:31, the emergency crew had control of the building. By sunrise, the plant was still standing. David Miller survived. Hundreds of workers went home. And before the emergency team separated, 7 silver gear pins were distributed as temporary identifiers during the investigation. Evelyn believed the truth would finally be documented. She was wrong. 3 days later, Victor called her into a private conference room. The notebook sat on the table between them. Beside it lay a typed report. Victor's name appeared beneath the heading, Emergency Ventilation Redesign Lead. Evelyn read the page twice. My name isn't here. The report reflects the approved chain of responsibility. I designed the bypass. You contributed. I warned you for 3 weeks. This is not the time to become emotional. She looked at him. I'm not emotional. I'm accurate. Victor pushed a folder toward her. Inside was a settlement agreement. Confidentiality, contract termination. A payment large enough to look generous to anyone who did not know what had been taken. If you refuse, he said, the company will classify your actions during the emergency as unauthorized entry into a restricted zone. I saved a man. You violated procedure. I saved the plant. You assisted the emergency response. Her hands went cold. What happens if I sign? You leave quietly. And if I don't? Victor folded his hands. You will never work for a major manufacturer again. Evelyn looked at the notebook, then at the report bearing his name. She thought of rent, medical bills from smoke exposure, the contracting agency already refusing to return her calls. She signed. Not because she agreed, because survival sometimes arrives disguised as surrender. Within months, Victor received an industry safety award. Within a year, Evelyn's applications stopped receiving responses. Her professional references became vague, then absent. The industry moved on. She did not. She kept the original notebook because Kenji had slipped it into her bag before she left the medical area, believing she would need it for the investigation. She kept the schematic, she kept the pin, and she kept teaching herself not to confuse being erased with being worthless. Back in the Detroit ballroom, Evelyn closed the notebook. No one spoke. Grant Wallace stood beside the table, pale and rigid. Kenji looked at the initials on the final page, then at Evelyn. They gave Victor the award, he said. Yes. And you lost your career. Yes. Laura covered her mouth. Thomas looked down. Several executives who had laughed earlier could no longer meet Evelyn's eyes. Grant searched for something to say, anything that might return the room to him. But there was nothing left. Evelyn wrapped the notebook again in the faded blue cloth. Her hands remained steady. I did not disappear, she said. Her voice carried through the ballroom. I was pushed out of every room that could confirm what happened. Kenji stepped back from the table. The 4 Japanese guests exchanged no words. They did not need to. One by one, they prepared to rise. Kenji Sato stood first. He did not move quickly. He placed both hands on the edge of the table, pushed his chair back, and came to his feet with the solemn care of a man entering a place of remembrance. Aiko rose beside him, then Hiroshi Tanaka, then Naomi Fujimori. The scrape of 4 chairs across polished flooring carried through the ballroom. No one applauded. Not yet. The gesture was quieter than applause and far more powerful. Kenji stepped away from the table and faced Evelyn. For the first time that evening, Grant Wallace was no longer at the center of the room. Kenji bowed. Deeply, his head lowered. His hands remained at his sides. Aiko bowed beside him. Hiroshi and Naomi followed. The ballroom froze. Nearly 200 American executives, lawyers, investors, and engineers watched 4 of the evening's most important guests offer formal respect to the woman they had allowed to be mocked, doubted, and treated like an intruder. Evelyn stood with the faded blue cloth still wrapped around the emergency notebook. Her canvas bag rested at her feet. The silver gear pin hung from the strap. She had imagined this moment in many forms over the years. A corrected report, a letter, a phone call, perhaps an apology delivered quietly in an office long after it could change anything. She had never imagined an entire ballroom witnessing it. That did not make the pain disappear. Kenji straightened. His eyes were wet, but his voice was steady. "Evelyn Carter," he said, 18 years ago, you prevented a disaster that would have taken lives, closed a factory, and damaged every company connected to it." A murmur moved through the room. Kenji continued, "You saw the failure before senior leadership accepted it. You warned us. When the system failed, you entered a dangerous corridor to help an injured technician. Then you completed the manual bypass that allowed hundreds of adult workers to evacuate. Several guests lowered their phones. Others kept recording, but their expressions had changed. The scene no longer felt like entertainment. It felt like evidence." Kenji turned toward the ballroom. The official report did not tell the truth. The words landed heavily. It credited a supervising engineer who ignored repeated warnings. It treated Ms. Carter as a minor contractor when she was the person whose calculations, judgment, and courage made the evacuation possible. Grant shifted beside the table. "Kenji, I think we should be careful about public accusations." Kenji looked at him. "We should have been careful 18 years ago." Grant's lips pressed into a thin line. Kenji turned back to the audience. "I was there." No one moved. I heard her instructions over the radio. I watched her draw the corrected route. I watched her return through smoke because another person was still inside. He looked toward Evelyn again. And I watched her disappear from the reports afterward. Evelyn's hands tightened around the notebook. Not from fear, from the strain of finally hearing the truth spoken aloud by someone the room considered powerful enough to believe. Kenji bowed once more, less deeply this time. I am sorry." The apology held no excuses, no carefully managed language, just regret. Aiko stepped forward. "My husband spoke of that night for years," she said. "He believed the engineer who saved the West Line had died, or chosen never to return." Evelyn answered softly. "I returned." Aiko's eyes lowered. "Yes." The single word carried shame. Evelyn looked around the ballroom, at Grant, at Laura, at Thomas, at the executives who had laughed, at those who had not laughed but had chosen silence. "I returned to factories," she said. "I returned to interviews. I returned to offices where people had copies of my work in their files." Her voice never rose. They just stopped opening the door. Several people shifted uncomfortably. Laura Bennett stared at the floor. She remembered checking Evelyn's identification 3 times. She remembered asking her to wait beside the catering corridor. She remembered thinking she was preventing confusion. Now she understood that she had participated in something older than this afternoon. The same kind of decision that had erased Evelyn once had nearly erased her again. Kenji stepped aside. Hiroshi Tanaka spoke next. "Our consortium's Ohio operations would not exist in their current form without the plant that survived that night." He paused. "Thousands of adult employees have worked there in the years since." Naomi added, "Billions of dollars in production moved through systems protected by a correction Miss Carter made under emergency conditions." A low wave of astonishment moved across the ballroom. Grant looked toward Richard Hale. Richard no longer looked back. Several executives near the front began to stand. The first was the older man Evelyn had helped in the lobby after his papers scattered across the floor. He rose slowly, his face troubled. Then Richard stood. A woman from an automotive labor firm followed. Then 2 engineers, a plant director, a lawyer. Chairs scraped across the room in uneven succession. Within seconds, entire tables were rising. Some stood from respect, some from shame, some because the Japanese delegation had made it clear that standing was now the correct thing to do. Evelyn saw the difference. She saw the people who had looked away when Grant mocked the repair kitchen, now lifting their chins with solemn expressions. She saw phones held high. She saw Laura stand only after nearly half the ballroom was already on its feet. She saw Thomas rise last among the security staff. Then the applause began. One person near the river windows brought his hands together. Another joined. Then another. The sound spread across the ballroom. It grew from scattered claps into a rolling wall of noise beneath the glass ceiling. Nearly 200 people stood. Grant remained seated. The contrast was impossible to miss. His shoulders stiffened. His face had lost its color. The applause became louder. Not celebration alone, release. The room wanted to believe that standing now repaired the silence from before. Evelyn knew better. She looked toward Kenji. He understood something had shifted in her expression. He lifted one hand. The Japanese delegation stopped clapping. The nearest guests noticed and lowered their hands. Slowly, the applause faded. The final claps echoed above the tables. Then silence returned. Evelyn stepped forward. The notebook remained in her hands. Her voice was gentle. That made the room lean closer. I appreciate the truth being spoken. Kenji nodded. But I need everyone here to understand something. She looked across the standing crowd. I did not become worthy when Mr. Sato recognized the pin. No one moved. I was worthy when I stepped off the bus. Laura closed her eyes briefly. I was worthy when I showed my invitation at registration. Evelyn's gaze reached her. Laura's face tightened. I was worthy when my name was moved from the table. Grant looked away. I was worthy when Mr. Wallace insulted the people I teach. Her voice remained calm, but each sentence carried more weight than the last. And I was worthy when all of you decided that remaining comfortable mattered more than stopping what was happening. The ballroom seemed to shrink. A man near the front lowered his phone. Someone behind him did the same. Evelyn looked toward the tables where people had laughed. Several could not meet her eyes. You stood when powerful people stood. No accusation in her tone, only truth. That was easier than standing when I was alone. The shame that followed was deeper than silence. It moved through the room, person by person. Thomas Blake took a slow breath. Laura's hands trembled around her tablet. Richard Hale stared at the place card still lying beside the service tray. He walked over, picked it up, and placed it back in front of Evelyn's chair. The damp corner had curled slightly. He did not straighten it. Perhaps he understood that evidence of what had happened should not be hidden. Grant finally rose, not out of respect, out of survival. He buttoned his jacket and stepped toward Kenji. This whole thing has been blown out of proportion. A few heads turned. His voice sounded strangely small now. I made a joke, a bad one maybe, but no one was hurt. Evelyn looked at him. Grant continued quickly. I didn't know who she was. The room reacted, not loudly, a faint collective exhale. Kenji's expression hardened. Evelyn tilted her head. You did not need to know who I was. Grant's mouth closed. You only needed to know I was a person standing in front of you. No one came to his defense. The same crowd that had once protected him with silence now left him exposed inside it. Grant looked towards the executives from his own company. Two of them stood near the back. Neither met his gaze. Kenji returned the emergency notebook to Evelyn with both hands. Then he turned to Grant. There is another matter. Grant's jaw tightened. What matter? Kenji looked toward the screens displaying sponsor logos across the ballroom. Wallace Motion Systems is currently under final consideration for a major international supply agreement with our consortium. The color drained further from Grant's face. The room became still once more. Kenji continued. Leadership character, workplace culture, and ethical judgment are part of that review. Grant stared at him. You can't be serious. I am completely serious. Grant stepped closer. You're going to threaten a contract over a misunderstanding. Kenji looked at Evelyn's displaced name card, at the written wager, at the phones that had recorded every word. No, he said. We are going to review a contract because tonight revealed there may be no misunderstanding at all. Grant's business partner, Samuel Price, stood near the stage. He slowly removed his Wallace Motion Systems sponsor badge and slipped it into his pocket. Grant saw him do it. So did everyone else. Near the back of the ballroom, a woman in a dark green suit lowered her phone. Her name was Angela Morris. She had served as operations director at Wallace Motion Systems until 8 months earlier. She had been quiet all evening. Now she walked toward Laura. Her expression was grave. I need to speak with you, Angela said. Laura looked at her. About what? Angela glanced toward Grant. About the employees he removed after they reported the same kind of behavior. Laura's face went pale. Grant could not hear the words from across the room. But he saw Angela. He recognized her. And in that instant, the $300,000 wager stopped being the greatest danger facing him. Angela Morris crossed the ballroom with the steady pace of someone who had spent months rehearsing a moment she never expected to receive. She was 51, tall, composed, and dressed in a dark green suit that stood out against the sea of navy and charcoal. For 11 years, she had served as operations director at Wallace Motion Systems. Her name had once appeared beneath grants on safety reports, expansion plans, and quarterly presentations. Then, 8 months earlier, it disappeared. Grant watched her approach Laura Bennett. His face tightened. Angela. She did not turn toward him, saw Laura lowered her tablet. So? What did you mean about employees being removed? Angela glanced at Evelyn, then at the phones still raised throughout the ballroom. I mean, this is not the first time Mr. Wallace has humiliated someone he believed had less power. Grant stepped forward. That is a lie. Angela finally looked at him. No. Her voice was quiet. That is why you're afraid. The room shifted again. This time, nobody looked away. Grant pointed toward the doors. You were terminated for misconduct. I resigned after refusing to sign false disciplinary reports. His business partner, Samuel Price, moved closer from the stage. False reports? Grant turned sharply. Sam, don't. Samuel ignored him. Angela, what reports? She reached into the leather case at her side. Grant's expression changed before she removed anything. That was enough to tell the room the contents mattered. Angela pulled out a thin folder. Not dramatic, not large. 12 pages at most. Yet Grant stared at it, as if she had carried a lit match into a room filled with fuel. 3 years ago, Angela said, a quality control supervisor named Jerome Ellis reported that black technicians were being disciplined more severely than other employees for identical production errors. Every person she mentioned was an adult. Angela continued. He asked for an internal review. What happened? Laura asked. Grant called him disloyal. Grant scoffed. He falsified performance data. Angela opened the folder. No, his data was accurate. She removed a printed chart. 2 months after he filed the complaint, he was placed on a performance plan. 6 weeks later, he was fired. Samuel's face hardened. I never saw this. You were shown a summary written by Grant's office. Grant took another step. This has nothing to do with tonight. Angela looked toward Evelyn's displaced place card. It has everything to do with tonight. The ballroom remained silent. Not the cowardly silence from earlier. This silence listened. Angela removed another page. Last year, a senior maintenance engineer named Denise Hall reported that Grant repeatedly interrupted her in meetings, reassigned her work to less experienced men, and mocked her accent in front of clients. Grant raised his voice. She was difficult. Angela did not react. She was promoted by the company that hired her after you forced her out. A few guests murmured. Grant's jaw tightened. Angela continued. An adult warehouse supervisor named Paul Nguyen reported similar behavior toward immigrant employees. 2 adult assembly specialists filed complaints after being ordered to train replacements, then being dismissed without explanation. Kenji Sato listened without interruption. Naomi Fujimori took notes. Hiroshi Tanaka quietly spoke to one of the consortium attorneys seated nearby. Grant saw the movement. Panic entered his eyes. These are disgruntled former employees. Angela looked at him. That is what you called everyone who told the truth. Samuel Price took the folder from her. He scanned the first page, then the second. His breathing changed. Why wasn't this brought to the board? It was. Samuel looked up. What? Angela pointed to a date in this corner. I delivered it to the executive committee 8 months ago. Samuel read the distribution list. Grant Wallace, Chief Legal Officer, Human Resources Vice President. 2 compliance officers. Samuel's name was absent. I was never copied. No. Angela looked at Grant. He kept it inside a small group. Grant tried to laugh. You expect everyone to believe I hid a folder? Angela's eyes did not leave his. You hid people. The sentence settled across the room. Laura looked down at the event tablet in her hands. Her role suddenly felt larger than registration schedules and seating charts. She had watched Grant single Evelyn out. She had watched him remove her name. She had watched him turn humiliation into a performance because he believed no one would challenge him. Now she understood that the ballroom had not witnessed an isolated mistake. It had witnessed a habit. Kenji spoke quietly to Naomi. She nodded and walked toward the consortium's legal advisor. Grant turned toward him. Kenji, we have spent 16 months negotiating this contract. Kenji remained composed. Yes. Thousands of jobs depend on it. That is why leadership matters. Grant lowered his voice. You know how these things work. People make accusations when money is involved. Angela answered before Kenji could. I left without severance. Grant ignored her. Our system supplies 6 of your facilities. Which is why an ethical failure at the top creates operational risk, Kenji said. This is personal. No. Kenji looked toward the written wager still resting on the table. You made it public. Grant's face flushed. Samuel continued reading the folder. A second Wallace Motion Systems executive joined him. Then a third. Whispers passed among them. Phones appeared. Not to record now, to call. One executive stepped away toward the windows and spoke urgently into his phone. Another typed a message with both thumbs. Grant noticed every movement. Sir, what are you doing? He demanded. Samuel looked up. Calling an emergency board session. Tonight? Yes. You don't have that authority. I do with support from 2 independent directors. One of the executives beside him nodded. Grant stared. The room he had entered believing he owned was now rearranging itself without his permission. Laura's phone vibrated. She checked the screen. A message from the summit's chairman appeared. Preserve all security footage. Do not delete or alter event recordings. A second message followed. Suspend Wallace Motion Systems sponsor privileges pending review. Laura looked toward the large digital screens. Grant's company logo still glowed beside the summit emblem. She signaled to the technical booth. What are you doing? Grant asked. Laura steadied herself. Following instructions. A technician tapped several keys. The Wallace Motion Systems logo disappeared from the ballroom screens. The empty space it left seemed enormous. Grant looked up. His name was gone. For the first time, Evelyn saw him experience a fraction of what had been done to her. The difference was that no one had fabricated his removal. His own conduct had created it. He turned toward the guests. "This is ridiculous." No one answered. "I made a joke." Angela folded her arms. "You ordered security to search an invited black woman's bag because you did not believe she belonged." "I was protecting the event," Laura spoke. "No." Every head turned toward her. Her voice trembled, but she continued. "You were protecting your idea of who belonged." Grant stared at her. "You work because my sponsorship pays for this summit." Laura swallowed. "That does not make you right." The sentence cost her something. Evelyn saw it. Fear passed across Laura's face, but she did not retreat. Thomas Blake stepped beside her. "The security report will state that Ms. Carter presented valid credentials and that no grounds existed for a search." Grant looked at him. "You think that protects your job?" Thomas answered calmly. "No. It protects the truth." The room had changed. Not because the people inside had suddenly become brave, because bravery had begun to move from person to person. The first refusal made the second easier. The second made the third possible. Grant looked toward Samuel. "You are destroying this company over optics." Samuel held up the folder. "This is not optics." He pointed toward Angela. "This is concealed risk." He pointed toward Evelyn. "This is recorded conduct." Then toward Kenji. "And this is a major client questioning whether we can be trusted." Grant's voice dropped. "You built your career beside me." Samuel looked tired. "Yes." The answer carried grief rather than loyalty. "That is why this is worse." Across the ballroom, Naomi returned to Kenji's side. She whispered something. Kenji nodded. Then he faced Grant. "Our consortium is suspending final negotiations with Wallace Motion Systems effective immediately." Grant went still. "Suspending?" "Pending independent review of leadership conduct, employment practices, and compliance records." "You cannot do that in the middle of an event." "We already have." Grant's mouth opened. No words came. The contract under review was worth more than the summit, more than the wager, and more than the polished confidence he had worn into the ballroom. Without it, Wallace Motion Systems would lose its largest expansion opportunity in a decade. Its lenders would ask questions. Its board would panic. Its competitors would circle. And every person in the room understood it. Grant looked at Evelyn. Something ugly returned to his face. Not contempt now, blame. "This is what you wanted?" Evelyn held his gaze. "No. You humiliated me in front of everyone." Evelyn's expression did not change. "You did that yourself." The answer left him nowhere to go. A notification sounded from Samuel's phone. He read it, then looked at Grant. "The board has approved temporary suspension of your executive authority until the emergency session concludes." Grant laughed once. It sounded empty. "You expect me to walk out of my own event?" Laura looked toward Thomas. Thomas approached without aggression. "Mr. Wallace, the summit chairman has requested that you leave the ballroom." Grant stared at him. Hours earlier, he had ordered the same man to search Evelyn's bag. Now Thomas stood between Grant and the room he could no longer command. Grant glanced toward their doors, then toward the silent executives. No one stepped forward to defend him. Not Samuel, not his legal counsel, not the people who had laughed at his jokes. His eyes found the handwritten wager on the table. $300,000, a figure that had once seemed large enough to crush Evelyn. Now it looked almost insignificant beside everything collapsing around him. Grant adjusted his jacket. "I'll leave." Thomas moved aside. Grant took 3 steps. Then Angela spoke. "One more thing." He stopped without turning. "The original complaints are not the only records." Grant's shoulders stiffened. Angela continued. I kept copies of the emails ordering us to alter disciplinary findings. The room tightened. Samuel looked at her. How many? Enough. Grant turned slowly. For the first time that evening, fear fully replaced arrogance. Angela's voice remained level. I sent them to outside counsel before I came here. Grant looked at the doors. Beyond them, phones were already ringing. Board members were gathering. Reporters in the media corridor had begun hearing fragments of the story. And somewhere inside Wallace Motion Systems, years of buried complaints were about to become impossible to contain. Grant Wallace stood near the ballroom doors while Thomas Blake waited beside him. For several seconds, Grant did not move. The room behind him had become unfamiliar. The same executives who had laughed when he mocked Evelyn now watched him with guarded faces. The same company officers who once nodded at his every sentence were speaking quietly into phones. His sponsor logo had vanished from the screens. His authority had been suspended. His largest pending contract was under review. And near the center of the ballroom stood Evelyn Carter, still wearing the faded work jacket he had judged before she spoke. Grant looked at her once more. Then he walked out. The heavy doors closed behind him. No one applauded. The silence that followed was not triumphant. It was exhausted. Evelyn lowered herself into the chair that had been assigned to her from the beginning. The damp name card rested beside her plate. The emergency notebook lay in front of her, wrapped again in the faded blue cloth. Kenji remained standing nearby. Would you like some time? He asked. Evelyn nodded. Yes. The crowd slowly began to separate. Some guests returned to their tables, though few resumed eating. Others gathered near the windows in hushed groups. Reporters waited beyond the ballroom entrance, held back by summit staff while executives argued over what could be confirmed. Laura approached Evelyn. Her face showed the strain of someone trying to speak without hiding behind professional language. Ms. Carter, Evelyn looked up. I owe you an apology. Laura's hands tightened around the tablet. I verified your invitation and still treated you as if the document had to be wrong. Evelyn waited. Laura continued. I asked you to wait by the catering corridor. I watched Mr. Wallace move your name. I knew he was wrong, and I stayed quiet because I was afraid of what his sponsorship meant. Her voice broke slightly. I am sorry. Evelyn studied her. There was no cruelty in her expression, only weariness. An apology matters, she said. What you do after it matters more. Laura nodded. I understand. No, Evelyn said gently. You're beginning to. Laura lowered her eyes. Thomas stepped forward next. I should have ended it sooner. You refused the search. I did the minimum required by policy. That was more than most people did. He absorbed the words. They trained us to identify safety threats, he said. Not power being misused by someone important. Evelyn looked around the ballroom. Then perhaps that training needs to change. Thomas nodded slowly. It will. Samuel Price approached with Angela Morris beside him. Samuel no longer wore his sponsor badge. Ms. Carter, he said, the board has asked me to inform you that Grant's executive authority is suspended pending the investigation. Evelyn's expression remained calm. That is a company matter. It became your matter when he targeted you. No, she replied. What he did to me was public. What your company allowed him to do to employees for years is the larger matter. Angela's eyes softened. Samuel looked ashamed. You're right. Evelyn turned toward Angela. Thank you for speaking. Angela gave a small, tired smile. I wish I had done it sooner. So do many people in this room. The sentence was not cruel. That made it harder to dismiss. A summit attorney arrived carrying the written wager inside a clear document sleeve. Ms. Carter, Mr. Wallace signed this publicly, and several witnesses recorded the terms. He placed it on the table. The summit's legal counsel has confirmed the promise is enforceable as a charitable pledge. Evelyn looked at the page. Her own signature appeared beneath Grant's. $300,000. More money than the Carter Community Repair Kitchen had operated on during several entire years combined. Kenji pulled out the chair beside her. Have you decided where it should go? Yes. Before she could say more, one of Grant's attorneys entered the ballroom. He was a narrow-faced man named Martin Cole, wearing a dark overcoat over his suit. He carried a leather portfolio and moved with the careful urgency of someone trying to solve a crisis before it became permanent. He stopped beside Evelyn's table. Ms. Carter, may we speak privately? Kenji's expression cooled. Evelyn looked at Martin. About what? The pledge. It was made publicly. Yes, but the payment itself can be handled discreetly. Evelyn understood immediately. So can the rest of the evening, I assume. Martin lowered his voice. Mr. Wallace is prepared to authorize the full $300,000 tonight. That was already the agreement. He is also willing to cover reasonable legal expenses associated with reviewing your old settlement. Several people nearby began listening. Martin glanced toward them. In exchange, he would ask that you refrain from making additional public statements until the board completes its investigation. Evelyn's face remained still. Ask? A mutual non-escalation agreement. You mean silence. I mean allowing an orderly process. She looked toward the ballroom doors Grant had just walked through. Orderly for whom? Martin hesitated. For everyone involved. Evelyn folded her hands. I was ordered into silence 18 years ago. His expression tightened. This is a different matter. It sounds familiar. Martin opened the portfolio. A prepared document rested inside. Evelyn did not touch it. He continued. The donation would be transferred immediately. No delay, no review. With conditions. Only temporary confidentiality. Evelyn looked at Kenji, then at Angela, then at Laura and Thomas. Every person around the table understood what was happening. Grant had lost the room, so he was trying to buy back control in a smaller one. Evelyn turned toward Martin. No. Miss Carter, the wager was unrestricted. I understand, but no condition will be attached to my dignity. Her voice was quiet. The sentence carried across the nearby tables. Martin closed the portfolio. Then the matter may take longer. Samuel stepped forward. No, it won't. Martin looked at him. Samuel held up his phone. The board has authorized immediate payment from Grant's discretionary foundation account. The transfer does not require his further approval. Martin's jaw tightened. You are exceeding your authority. The board disagrees. The attorney looked from Samuel to Angela, then toward the growing number of witnesses. He knew the negotiation was over. He closed the portfolio completely. I'll inform Mr. Wallace. Evelyn watched him leave. Kenji said nothing until the doors closed. Then he asked, where should the donation go? Evelyn placed one hand on the old canvas bag. To the Carter Community Repair Kitchen. Laura smiled faintly. All of it? All of it. Samuel looked surprised. You may be entitled to personal damages beyond the wager. That can be discussed later. You nearly lost your apartment last winter, Angela said quietly. Evelyn looked at her. News traveled quickly in neighborhoods and nonprofits. The repair kitchen had struggled after a heating failure, and Evelyn had covered part of the emergency expense from her own savings. Yes. And you still want the full amount donated? Yes. Kenji studied her. What will the workshop do with it? Evelyn's voice warmed as she answered. Adult technical certifications. Transportation passes for people who lose jobs and cannot reach training centers. Legal support for contract workers whose designs or reports are taken without credit. She glanced toward the Japanese delegation. Language assistance for immigrant employees who understand the work, but are treated as if an accent means ignorance. Naomi nodded slowly. Evelyn continued. And emergency grants for adults starting over after layoffs. Samuel looked at the handwritten wager again. You could keep a portion. Evelyn's expression softened. What was taken from me should open doors for someone else. The ballroom became quiet once more. Not because someone had demanded silence, because no one wanted to disturb the meaning of her words. Kenji reached into his jacket and removed a card. I would like our consortium to match part of the donation. Evelyn looked at him. That is not necessary. I know. He placed the card beside the notebook. That is why it matters. Naomi added, we can also provide retired equipment from our training centers. Hiroshi nodded. And certified instructors. Laura stepped closer. The summit has a community partnership fund. I can recommend a formal grant. Evelyn looked at all of them. Hours earlier, none had known the repair kitchen existed. Now powerful people were offering resources. The change brought hope. It also carried a warning. You are welcome to help, she said. But the workshop will not become a publicity stage. Kenji smiled. Agreed. No banners with executive names. Agreed. No photographs of trainees used without their permission. Agreed. And the people who learn there will not be treated like charity. Kenji inclined his head. They will be treated as colleagues. For the first time that evening, Evelyn allowed herself a full smile. Across the city, Marcus Reed was standing inside the repair kitchen beneath buzzing fluorescent lights, trying to keep an old boiler alive. Rain had started tapping against the cafeteria windows. 3 adult trainees remained with him, helping clean the workbenches before closing. Marcus's phone rang. He wiped his hands on a rag. Carter Community Repair Kitchen. Marcus. He recognized Evelyn's voice immediately. You all right? I'm all right. He heard voices behind her. A large room. Reporters. Movement. What happened? Evelyn looked across the ballroom. It's a long story. Marcus leaned against the workbench. You still at that summit? Yes. Did they give you the recognition? She glanced at the silver pin. Something like that. He waited. Evelyn took a breath. The workshop is receiving $300,000. Marcus said nothing. The line remained quiet long enough that she checked the screen. Marcus? I'm here. His voice had changed. Say that again. 300,000. For what? For being right at the wrong man's expense. Marcus slowly sat on a stool. The old boiler clicked behind him. One of the trainees noticed his face and stopped sweeping. What are we going to do with that kind of money? Marcus whispered. Keep the doors open. He closed his eyes. The repair kitchen had been 6 weeks from losing its lease. He had not told Evelyn. He had been trying to solve it alone. How did you know? He asked. Know what? Marcus looked toward the ceiling. A brown water stain spread above the north workbench. The landlord raised the rent. We got the notice yesterday. Evelyn went still. How much time? 45 days. Why didn't you tell me? You had enough to carry. She looked down at the old notebook. So did you. Marcus laughed once, but grief sat inside the sound. Well, I guess we're not closing. No. Her answer was firm. We are not closing. Behind Marcus, the adult trainees watched him wipe his eyes with the back of one hand. He turned away, embarrassed. Evelyn heard the small sounds of the workshop through the phone. A broom against concrete. A wrench set down on metal. The old boiler coming back to life. Warmth returned to her face. Marcus? Yes? Love the lights on. He smiled. For how long? Evelyn looked around the ballroom that had tried to send her away. As long as someone needs a place to start again. No one answered immediately. The sentence settled into the room more deeply than applause ever could. The executives who remained standing slowly took their seats. Conversations resumed in scattered whispers, but the energy that had filled the summit only a few hours earlier had changed completely. Discussions about contracts, production schedules, and investment forecasts now shared space with quieter questions about responsibility, courage, and the cost of overlooking people. Outside the ballroom, reporters waited patiently behind temporary barriers. Inside, the evening finally came to a close. Kenji Sato approached Evelyn one last time. He held out a simple white business card. Unlike the formal presentation earlier that evening, there was no ceremony now, only sincerity. "My offer still stands," he said, "not because of what you did 18 years ago." Evelyn looked at him. "Because of tonight?" Kenji smiled gently. "Because I have now seen your character twice." She accepted the card. "Our consortium is creating an advisory group to improve communication between engineering teams across different countries. We need someone who understands both technical systems and people." Evelyn glanced at the card before slipping it into the notebook. "I won't leave Detroit. You don't have to. I won't stop teaching. I would be disappointed if you did." She laughed softly. "That wasn't the answer I expected." Kenji looked around the ballroom. "I've met many engineers." Then he looked back at Evelyn. "I've met very few teachers." They shook hands. This time, neither of them was carrying the weight of unfinished history. Across the room, Laura Bennett stood with Thomas Blake beside one of the digital displays. The summit chairman had arrived quietly during the final conversations. After reviewing the security recordings and speaking with several witnesses, he addressed the remaining organizers. "Beginning next year," he announced, "every summit volunteer, manager, sponsor, and security supervisor will complete intervention training before the event opens." Laura listened carefully. No invited guest should ever have to prove they deserve basic respect before receiving it. Thomas nodded. The chairman continued. "Registration procedures will also change. Once credentials are verified, no attendee may be delayed or redirected based on appearance alone." Laura felt a mixture of relief and regret. The policy would protect someone else. It had arrived too late for Evelyn. Still, it mattered. Sometimes systems changed because one person refused to disappear quietly. Later that evening, Samuel Price addressed the Wallace Motion Systems leadership team in a closed conference room 2 floors above the ballroom. Grant Wallace was not present. The emergency board session had already begun. Independent counsel had received Angela Morris's documents. Additional employees had started contacting investigators. What began as one public incident had opened the door to years of hidden complaints. The board voted unanimously to place Grant on indefinite administrative leave pending the outcome of the investigation. Within weeks, that leave became permanent. Months later, the board announced his removal as chief executive officer. The official statement cited failures in leadership, workplace conduct, and corporate governance. The announcement never mentioned the Great Lakes Automotive Summit by name. It did not have to. Everyone inside the industry already knew. The international supply agreement eventually moved forward under new company leadership, but only after Wallace Motion Systems completed extensive reforms, independent oversight, and workplace policy changes. The company survived. Its culture did not remain the same. 3 months after the summit, autumn gave way to winter. Snow rested lightly along the sidewalks outside the Carter Community Repair Kitchen. Inside, the converted cafeteria felt warmer than ever. Fresh paint covered walls that had once shown water damage. New workbenches lined the room. Updated safety equipment hung neatly beside donated tools. A small classroom occupied what had once been the storage pantry. Adults filled every station. Some repaired appliances. Others studied electrical diagrams. Several practiced industrial measurements using donated training equipment provided through Kenji's consortium. Marcus Reed watched the room with quiet satisfaction. He no longer worried about keeping the lights on. He worried instead about finding enough tables for everyone who wanted to learn. The workshop had expanded without losing its heart. Evelyn still arrived by bus most mornings. She still carried the same weathered canvas bag. She still greeted Curtis, the bus driver. She still refused payment when someone needed a bandage more than she needed thanks. Her jacket remained faded. She never replaced it. Several people had offered. She always smiled. This one still works. On one snowy afternoon, Kenji visited Detroit with 2 engineers from Japan. They spent the morning observing the workshop. No photographers, no speeches. Just people working together. One trainee carefully rebuilt an industrial compressor that had been donated by a nearby factory. Another practiced reading bilingual maintenance manuals. An adult warehouse worker who had recently lost his job completed his first electrical certification exam. A woman changing careers after 25 years in manufacturing successfully diagnosed a commercial refrigeration unit by herself. Marcus quietly leaned toward Kenji. She makes everyone believe they're capable before she teaches them how. Kenji nodded. I noticed. At the end of the visit, he walked toward Evelyn. She was helping one trainee understand the difference between replacing a part and understanding why it failed. She looked up. How'd they do? Kenji smiled. They're becoming engineers. They already were. He laughed. I keep forgetting. She returned to the workbench. That's why we teach. Several months later, the summit committee invited Evelyn to attend the following year's opening ceremony. This time not as an invited contributor, as the keynote speaker. She accepted on one condition: no reserved parking. The chairman looked confused. Why? I'll arrive the way I always do. She stepped off the city bus that morning carrying the same canvas bag. Curtis smiled as she reached the sidewalk. Big day? Just another workshop, she answered. When she entered the convention center, Laura Bennett met her personally. No hesitation, no repeated questions, no request for identification beyond the standard badge scan everyone completed. Welcome back, Laura said. Evelyn smiled. Thank you. Nothing more needed to be said. The registration desk had learned. Late one afternoon, after another long day of teaching, rain tapped gently against the repair kitchen windows. The last trainee packed away a toolbox and waved goodbye. Marcus locked the front door. You heading home? In a minute. He nodded and left. The building grew quiet. Only the soft hum of the heating system remained. Evelyn walked toward the oldest workbench in the room. Above it hung a simple wooden frame. Inside rested the original emergency schematic. The faded red correction remained clearly visible. Beneath it, engraved on a brushed brass plate, were 6 words. Credit belongs where the work was done. Beside the frame hung the silver gear pin, not locked away, not displayed inside glass, just hanging from a small hook where anyone entering the workshop could see it. One of the newer trainees had asked earlier that week why she never wore it anymore. Evelyn had smiled. It doesn't need to remind me anymore. A knock sounded at the front door. She opened it. An adult trainee who had recently completed the certification program stood outside in the rain. He held a toolbox in one hand. I got the job, he said. Evelyn's smile widened. I knew you would. I wanted you to know before I told anyone else. You earned it. He hesitated. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why didn't you ever tell us you once saved a factory? She looked back toward the framed schematic, then at the silver gear pin. Finally, she picked up a wrench from the workbench and placed it gently into his hand. Because the work mattered, she said, even when my name didn't. He looked at the wrench, then at her. Understanding slowly replaced curiosity. After he left, Evelyn switched off the workshop lights one row at a time. Only the lamp above the framed schematic remained. Its warm glow reflected softly from the silver gear pin. Outside, rain continued falling across Detroit. Inside, the room waited for another morning, another bus ride, another adult determined to begin again. The world had once measured Evelyn Carter by a faded jacket, a worn canvas bag, and a seat people believed she did not deserve. It had taken a forgotten notebook, an old engineering drawing, and a tiny silver pin for powerful people to recognize what had always been true. But those were never the things that made her extraordinary. The extraordinary part was that after everything taken from her, she still chose to build instead of break. She still chose to teach instead of boast. She still chose to open doors instead of keeping score. And long after the applause faded, the contracts were rewritten, and the headlines disappeared. The brightest light in Detroit was not inside a convention center. It was inside a converted repair kitchen, where people who had once been overlooked learned, every single day, that dignity never needed permission to exist. Evelyn Carter showed us that giving without needing recognition is not weakness. It is a quiet form of power. Even after her work and name were taken from her, she used her victory to create opportunities for people who might otherwise be erased. Today, ask one hardworking person what they know instead of assuming what they do not. That simple moment of respect may be all someone like Evelyn needs to finally be seen. Would you have spoken up for Evelyn before the Japanese VIPs rose to their feet? Tell us honestly in the comments, and stay close, because the next story begins with someone else the room believes it can safely ignore.